Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Now, if there's any one thing that defines this time of year, it's apples. The sight of them on trees ranging from slightly furred browny green of the russets to brilliant red and even the dark purple of an apple like Spartan. But above all for me, it's the smell, that cidery tang that is carried on the slightly damp autumnal breeze. It's the perfect marker of the season. And when you store them, it needs to be cool, dark, and slightly humid. It's no good, say, in an airing cupboard, and they'll just shrivel and dry up. And then to go to your apple store, take out one of these lovely fruits, cut it open, and all that autumnal cidery tang comes flooding back. On tonight's programme, Frances continues to look at extreme gardening. This week, she is on the west coast of Scotland.
This is the protection from the famous Highland midge.
They really itch, don't they?
Yes.
We visit a couple whose collection for acers sets their garden alight in autumn.
This is, I think, one of the brightest reds that you get, and the combination of the trees is magnificent.
Joe celebrates a rock garden of epic proportions.
This is the rocking stone, and if you just very gently try this end, it actually rocks perfectly.
It's nice to have a sense of fun and play in the garden.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I shall be planting elephant garlic, moving primulas to a new home, and collecting my honey. Whilst I love apples and try and eat them for as much of the year as possible, the very best apple cannot match the best pear. A good pear, exactly ripe, is a supreme, sensuous experience. It's lovely. But, and it's a big but, to get it exactly ripe needs a little bit of organisation. Now, I need to get a container here. Now, this is a variety called Concord. And you can see it's got good fruit, they're in a good shape, and you just take a finger, put it on the point where the stalk meets the stem, the spur of the espalier, and just lift carefully. And if that comes away, you got to throw it, and that is not ready to come, so we'll leave it. And just do it to all of them. Now that one's come off neatly in my hand. And we want to keep the stalk, and then you handle it like apples really carefully. This is treasure. So what I do is I pick them over the course of about 2 weeks, put them in the larder on a shelf so they're not touching, and then I'll take at any one time about half a dozen and put them on a sunny windowsill. And those will ripen in a matter of days. And you can tell if a pear is ripe by, at the stalk end, just press gently. And if it's soft, it's ready, because it does most of its ripening from the inside out. A ripe pear is juicy in a way that almost no other fruit is. The late, great Christopher Lloyd said that the only way to truly enjoy a pear was to take all your clothes off and eat it in the bath. And now is a good time to be thinking of planting pear trees. Bare root plants have the great advantage of being cheaper and a much better range of varieties to choose from. And all you need to do is buy a whip, which is a straight stem, and then put in some sort of support, and these are just simple bean sticks, but you could do something fancy with wires, and just start training the buds that grow to grow along the stem. At first, that seems like a long journey. It's going to take forever. In fact, they're surprisingly quick. In 2 or 3 years, you have espaliers, and in 10 years, they look as though they've been there forever. Anybody can grow pears. They couldn't be more domestic. Any garden, anywhere. which of course is a great virtue. But Frances Tophill has been looking at gardens that are not anywhere. They're right out on the edge, taking horticulture to the extreme. And this week, she's gone to Little Loch Broom on the very northwest of Scotland.
Exposed. Stormy. Remote. But beautiful. The north of Scotland. Where I'm standing is on the same latitude as St. Petersburg and Alaska. Some places with some pretty extreme and inhospitable weather. So you might think that any garden laying on the same latitude will struggle and feel uncomfortable being here. Not this one, created by Sue Pomeroy and Will Sues. It's a fantastic garden and in a beautiful setting as well, but you really are right on the edge here. So yes. There must be some challenging conditions.
Yes. Well, the wind, you get gales up to 50 miles an hour on a regular basis. That's our average norm, gusting up to 80 miles an hour and sometimes recorded 120 miles an hour.
Really?
So you can imagine it does cause a lot of problems. Everything has to be grown with that in mind. As well, of course, we have heavy rain.
Yeah, I mean, do you know your rainfall per year?
Yeah, on average it's 80 inches a year.
Wow. So that's sort of 3 times the national average of rainfall.
Yes.
That's massive.
It is. And how we cope with that in our garden is by putting in a lot of rills and drainage around the edges of the flower beds. And if you notice, the garden's on a gentle slope, so it sort of takes the water, hopefully, away down into the sea.
You can see we've created this very large raised bed here.
Yes.
Using the natural soil here, it's very sandy and well drained and it's full of these stones as well.
But all these are from your own garden?
Yes, yes.
There's loads.
The idea of this bed was actually to build it as a South African bed. We've chosen the plants that can cope with extreme amounts of rain, and also having the impoverished soil is very necessary for South African flora. They hate nutrients. You can find them up in the high mountains, so those obviously require still quite a lot of rain, but free drainage. And it's really beautiful. It's structurally amazing.
Despite the extra steps that Will and Sue have gone to with their drainage, some plants still need special care.
So Frances, we're digging out these succulents from this round bed here because they need a little bit more protection in the winter time. They come from a hotter area in South Africa, the Karoo.
Right. But I mean, this aloe obviously is tender, but there's another one in the middle. Does that not come out? It's much bigger.
We actually leave that one in, Frances. It's actually hardy. It's Aloe striatula, and it's been in position for about 3 to 4 years now.
Really?
And it's coped really, really well.
That's so surprising, isn't it?
You just actually pop it straight into this terracotta pot. It looks very loose,
okay,
and empty. We don't put soil in with it.
No soil, no gravel.
It's a storage vessel for the winter, and the only bit of watering we do is to actually water the outside of the terracotta pot, which absorbs the moisture and just keeps it going throughout the winter. That's all it needs, is that tiny bit of moisture, but we try to keep it as dry as possible.
So clearly, as well as the water, wind is a massive consideration. And how do you plant with that?
We've chosen grasses like the Melina here, the Melina transparent, which actually acts as a fantastic prop because it's got a central root system. Herbaceous plants tend to have a spreading root system and grow around these grasses and grow up through grasses.
Oh, so it sort of acts like a stake, but a natural staking system.
Absolutely, yes, like a bit like an anchor. But the best thing about the grasses, of course, is we use their movement. So in the wind kind of enhances the grasses' movement. We also have this beautiful eupatorium, which is really solid. We had an 80-mile-an-hour gale actually at the beginning of August.
Really?
And it's all still here.
Yeah, you would never know, would you, from looking at it?
No, not at all.
I think we need to explain what's happening with our faces. So why are we wearing these, Will?
Yes, this is the protection from the famous Highland midge.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, this is what we have to wear for 4 months of the summer when they're out.
I know, they really itch, don't they?
Yes.
So, what are you doing with this Watsonia?
This Watsonia has stopped flowering.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the flower here on a healthy plant.
Mm-hmm.
What it needs now is dividing.
Okay, that's quite a big clump there, isn't it?
Yes. These are divisions from last year, so these are ready for planting out now.
So the reason that you can't just divide that and stick them back in the ground is what, because there'd be weaker plants?
Yeah, there's a tendency for them to rot off if you plant the divisions directly in the ground
Okay.
at this time of year.
And then leave them in a pot for a year?
Yes, till they get established in a good root system.
I think sometimes us gardeners don't give ourselves credit for what we do. And this is a prime example where you take one kind of landscape, which is really quite barren, it's harsh. But if you put in a lot of hard work, you can turn it into something like this, completely different.
Joe Swift has been visiting a range of rock gardens. And this week he goes to Chatsworth in Derbyshire, where the rockery is truly magnificent.
Last time we looked at how rockeries became popular with the Edwardians and Victorians as somewhere to display and cultivate alpines and other similar plants. But personally, I like a rockery where the rocks take centre stage. Over the last couple of years, designers have used rocks to structure and define their gardens, allowing them to give character to the space and help shape the planting. Now, as a garden designer, I find that really exciting, and I've come to Chatsworth, where two garden designers many years apart have used rocks in dynamic but very different ways. Steve, I've got an admission to make. This is my first time ever at Chatsworth.
Wow. Very disappointing.
I should have been here years ago.
Yeah,
and it feels like a pilgrimage somehow. Now, what is the idea behind this rockery originally?
So the rock garden was built by the 6th Duke of Devonshire and his head gardener Joseph Paxton. And between them, they had travelled across Europe and they had been building fantastic things here at Chatsworth. And they were getting more and more ambitious, I suppose. So the rock garden was about bringing nature from the surrounding landscape in and turning it into a garden feature, but on a monumental scale.
They just look so natural. Is that one enormous rock?
No, it does look like it, doesn't it? But no, it's many rocks, and they're stacked up on top of each other and almost cemented together to create this wonderful stack.
That's amazing. I mean, the craftsmanship behind that, and it does look like it's just a rocky outcrop, you know, a natural form.
And just imagine, you know, nearly 200 years ago, how did they get it all up there? How did they lift these 2 or 3 ton boulders to do it? It's, yeah, phenomenal. Paxton developed a steam-powered crane that he built on site to lift the rocks into place. This is the rocking stone, and if you just very gently try this end, it actually rocks perfectly. This was designed to be a spectacle, for something to show off with the guests that were coming around the garden at that time.
It's nice to have a sense of fun and play in the garden.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, of course, you know, more domestic-sized rockery, some that I've looked at, are much smaller, well, smaller rocks, but also the approach to planting is completely different as well, using lots of small alpines in amongst the rocks. Here, everything's large-scale, but how has the planting evolved and what is the approach now to it?
Originally, it was secondary to the rocks. The rocks were the main thing, and the planting was quite natural, probably reflecting nature, but with a horticultural twist, but certainly low-key compared to the rocks. And then over the years, the rockery's gone out of fashion, and some generations have liked it more than others. So particularly the 9th Duchess, we know, wasn't the biggest fan of the rockery. She didn't really want to see it, so she planted it as a woodland and planted it with trees, yew trees actually. You can still see some today. In the 60s, the 11th Duke and Duchess cleared a lot of the woodland away, and then they planted it more ornamentally with herbaceous plants, but also with things like rambling roses. So what we've done in the last 5 and 10 years is started to remove much of the vegetation actually. We've selected the key plants we want to maintain, the odd tree and the odd shrub, just to try and put it back to what we think the 6th Duke wanted.
Do you think someone can take the essence of this and recreate it in their own garden?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some lovely areas where we've got some very simple planting, whether they're shrubby or herbaceous, and just a few rocks just to create a bit of a stack or a bit of a feature, and they just provide a foil to the planting. Of course, perhaps not on the scale of these rocks here, not 2 or 3 tons, but on a smaller scale, that could be recreated by anybody.
Last year, one of our most successful contemporary garden designers used Paxton's Chatsworth garden as his inspiration at the Chelsea Flower Show. Dan Pearson used elements of Paxton's designs and rocks taken from Chatsworth itself to create a naturalistic rock formation around a water feature. The Chatsworth garden won Best in Show.
Now, what did he take from here for his inspiration?
He really loved the trout stream, and it's a wonderful feature created by the 6th Duke of Devonshire, and he loved the planting that was already established along the trout stream, but then put a horticultural twist on it, and that's what we've brought back and added back here. So we've now got an improved trout stream thanks to the Chelsea Flower Gardens.
So we've got the lovely primulas, haven't we? I mean, they're looking great.
It's called Inveru, and Dan selected it because it represented the primulas we were already growing here.
And of course we've got these rock formations which, well, they are classic Chatsworth.
They are.
He's used them in a very different way. You know, down there is like a huge, serious rockery. Here, they're just single sculptural features.
Absolutely, and of course here it's about the stream, it's about the planting, and so they're secondary, or they're in the background, I suppose. There's nearly 3,500 plants dotted along the trout stream, which is a huge number. And you hardly know which ones have been here a long time and which ones have been introduced.
I remember a very dark iris at Chelsea, an absolute beauty. Is that here?
Yeah, we have a bit further down the stream. We've got dark Orva, and it has the inky stems and then the wonderful dark flowers. And yeah, one of the many things that have come back.
Wow. Sounds lovely. So the thing is that, you know, people think, oh, rock gardens, rockeries, they're sort of like this current bun effect. I'm trying to persuade them that actually they can be incorporated in gardens in so many different ways. You know, something like this, it sort of connects you with geology.
It does, and the planting's fantastic here. We've got natural planting around it and ornamental planting behind, and it just works perfectly. It's fantastic.
I feel like I'm preaching to the converted, frankly.
Yeah,
if you didn't like rocks, you wouldn't want to work here, would you?
I paid my only visit to Chatsworth a couple of years ago. I was bowled over by that rockery. I just thought it was magnificent. Mind you, the whole gardens are extraordinary, and like hundreds of thousands of people do every year, if you can make a visit, it's definitely a place to go to. I've got some plants growing here in the border in the cottage garden, which actually look really good by water and in amongst rocks, and I want to move them. They are a primula, Primula florindi, also known as the Tibetan cowslip. And like cowslips, they have a tall stem, but much taller than any cowslip. And these yellow flowers, sort of slightly lemony, really fresh and bright. They are very, very beautiful. However, they got a bit crowded, and they're not really working in the front. But I grew them all from seed, which I collected from the damp garden, and I want to return them now to the damp garden and break them up. Traditionally, you move and plant primulas in spring. But the way the weather has changed, it means our autumns are getting warmer and warmer. So now is a really good time to move plants and to plant fresh ones. So that's come up very easily. We'll pop that in there. Sorry, Nigel. There you go. Well done. Let's take these to the damp garden. Good boy, yeah. The damp garden with the pond is quietly fading into autumn. Hasn't yet hit that high tone of autumn glory, which will come in a few weeks. Now, the idea in here is to add primulas in amongst the hostas. I've cleared quite a lot of ferns. I've divided hostas, made a bit of room, because when we initially planted this, there were many, many primulas, candelabra types, florindi, bulliana, all these lovely flowers which are at their best May, June and into July, and I want to recreate that. I've got a mixture of leaf mould and garden compost. Just remove that. That gives it a really nice rich soil. I'm tempted actually to put a sizable clump because that will enable them to compete a bit better. And if you think of the flowers growing up this tall, they need to be fairly muscular to get in there. Right. Let's pop that into its new home. Cut off the spent flower heads. If you're moving any plant, but obviously particularly a plant that thrives on moisture, give it a really good soak. Water it into its new home. And that will set it up for winter. The whole point of this is to have the roots growing strongly over the next month or so. So that next spring, it's in a good place, the roots are strong and can support the top growth. Now that's a big clump. I think I'm going to put a smaller amount over on the other side. I've got a gap I've created in here, and in fact I'm going to divide some up and spread them around. And obviously when you divide any herbaceous plant, it stimulates new growth. So we'll just loosen that up. Now, if I take a clump like that, that's a really decent sized one, the best way to break this up will be just to put the spade in to the middle, then being brave, just force it apart, like that. And obviously I could break that up even more. Each one of these pieces here, if you can see, there's one, there's another. Each one of those would make a separate plant. I'll water that well, and I've got another plant here which I can put elsewhere. One of the very best colours in this garden is the Viburnum plicatum Marizii. And these leaves, which are starting to turn now, will be a deep, rich chocolate purple by the end of the month. It is a stunner, and the most dramatic autumn colour that I've got in the garden. However, not as dramatic as the autumn display in the garden of Ray and Michelle Blundell in Staffordshire, where their collection of acers fills the autumn garden with fire.
I first met Michelle in about 1984. We decided to buy this piece of ground and we decided to build a green oak frame house. So we sussed out the frame. I got a price for things and said, that sounds expensive. I think I could do that myself.
And I got all the grotty jobs, didn't I?
Yep.
The garden was always in the back of our minds, so we asked the digger guy to level all the soil off, and at the same time he dug out a pond for us, and that was the start of the garden.
When I was 13, I worked with my uncle who was a landscape gardener, and he really was a big influence on my gardening life. The garden is about 1/3 of an acre, so it gave us a lot of ideas to speculate with. Michelle wanted to see particular trees and things from the house, and so we sat down with a piece of paper, sorted out the plants that we wanted, and Japanese maples figured largely in that because they were such wonderful things with colour in the spring, through the summer, into the autumn, and then the coloured stems all the way through the winter. The tree behind me is the first acer that I bought. I bought it about 15 years ago. It's called Eddisbury. It is a magnificent tree. It's fantastic for its autumn colour, but it also has red stems. And to complement that, we have Another striking tree, which is called Osakazuki. This is, I think, one of the brightest reds that you get. The one at the back of it is called Western Burnt Orange, also fantastic. And the combination of the trees in this group in the autumn is magnificent. This section of the garden was from an idea that Michelle saw at Trentham Gardens, a wonderful combination of Verbena and Stipa gigantica. The wind whistles through it, it's so ephemeral, and it's a wonderful combination and lasts for a long time from August through till the autumn.
The pond area is my domain. I lovingly placed all the pebbles around the pond. I love growing xanthodias from seed and created this bog garden earlier this year.
This is where I overwinter my young aces. It's airy, it's light, but it doesn't have the rain falling onto the aces, which is what you need to protect against during the winter. They don't mind the cold, they're okay down to, I think, -18, but it does serve as a sort of a nursery over the winter and stop them getting too wet. This bed here I created to show what you can do with dwarf aces. This tree here, which is beautiful at this time of the year, is called Skeeter's Broom. It's about as tall as it will get, about 2 metres, and this time of the year it's absolutely fantastic. If we move through here, this is a variety called Kirohime. By contrast, a smaller, also dwarf variety, won't get more than about 1 metre high. Planted this about 3 years ago, but the plants themselves, the trees were looked after for 3 years, probably before that, from small pots, gradually growing them into larger pots, protected from the elements, because they need time to accustom to the conditions, the microclimate. And I find that if you put them in the autumn, they sit in the ground and they sulk. They don't like those conditions over winter. Whereas if you plant them in the spring, give them a few months through the summer to establish themselves, then you get all the beauty of the new leaves and you find out if it likes it there. And in the autumn, this is what you get. The issue with collecting aces is that there are many thousands. You go further and further afield to find the obscure and the unusual, and this passion has taken me all around the country and into Europe, coming back with carloads of trees. I've now got about 120 different varieties of those thousands.
And you have become quite obsessive about it. So.
Yes, I think it's a great thing to do.
You can visit the garden on the 6th of November when it will be open for charity, and you get all the details on our website. And I have to say I'm inspired to try aces again. I did try and grow some here about 20 years ago, and the site was very windy and they didn't like that at all. But now there's more protection. I think it's time for another bash. So next spring, we'll plant some aces. The colchicums are appearing here in the copse. They're called naked ladies because they appear white, untouched by sun, leafless, exposed, but with these lovely flowers, crocus-like flowers on top, looking as though they've arrived 6 months too early. But this is their season. And they can be planted round about late summer. So too late now for this year. And the great thing about planting them under a hedgerow or under the shade of trees is it does protect them from rain, because rain can just smash and bash them. They do seem to be very delicate, but the strength of their flower and their colour is good. Now, coming up on the programme, Alan Powers spends a day in the gardens of the Palace of the Bishop of Wells.
One of the best places to enjoy a herbaceous border is from right in the middle of it.
That's it,
You're in amongst the plants. You're in amongst the architecture of the plants. You can smell the scent.
And Flo Headland has gone to Birmingham, to green grey Britain, and is adding colour to a concrete roof garden.
I've chosen plants that are tough and that will survive, you know, with very little watering. So they're quite drought tolerant.
But first, we catch up with Adam Frost as he continues his transformation of his new garden in Lincolnshire. And we joined him a couple of weeks ago.
It's one of my favourite times of the year, the beginning of autumn. Lovely cool damp mornings, the perfect conditions for planting out. The shrubs and herbaceous plants have arrived, so it's time to get them placed and get on with my front garden. You know, I'm so excited. Early in the morning, out planting in September, what else could you want? I think this time of year you have to use your imagination a little bit. Some of it's looking a bit tired, you know, but you don't worry about necessarily what's on top. It's what's underneath. It's those roots. As long as those root systems are good, that's all you're worried about this time of year. This is all edible, so everything that we're using in this space can be used within the kitchen. Things like Scottish lovage, we can use the leaves. Things like my gooseberry, I actually dug it up from the old garden, brought it with me, so it's suffered a little bit through the year, but next year that will do its thing. You know, I've got thymes in here, I've got strawberries in here, and actually as I move away from this space, it will be slightly more sort of international, I suppose. So as I've got closer to the house and where you would naturally walk, I've started to actually mix the gravels up. So though I had the larger gravel, I've started to introduce a smaller gravel all the way through. And I suppose it just makes it look a little bit more inviting. Anyway, I'm going to get on planting these plants. Over the past month, the veg garden has really come on. And now it's time to get the picking paths finished. Now the footings are all set. Well, see, on a day like this, remember, is actually everything's going to dry out really, really quickly. So, first of all, what I've done is made sure this mortar mix, which is sharp sand and cement, 6:1, is an awful lot wetter. First brick goes in, there we go. And then what I do, it's got a boat level, tiny little level, and there she is, beautiful. And all I do really now is work my way back. I'm actually not pointing these bricks. You'll find sometimes you'll see the edge of bricks and there's a pointing gap in between. They'll do a lovely job just as they are, so I'm just what we call butting them up. One or two, a little bit high. You know, design-wise, the back wall here, the bricks were a bit of an oddity, and I think that was a nice thing to work on and pick out those details. So eventually when the whole garden's put together, you'll get that idea that the wall actually really flows into the space, you know, and it'll have a real reason. What I've got is a tiny little gap. I'm probably just going to tease some of these joints apart. What I've got to do, because I've moved those, I've just got to make sure that I key them all back in. The shuttering can now be removed, and I'm haunching along the edge of the bricks. This will help hold them firmly in place. The wisteria that I've completely and utterly fallen in love with has finished flowering for the second time, so I can now finally give it a prune. I think people worry quite a lot about pruning wisterias, and actually it's quite a simple process. And all I'm doing is looking for these wispy old shoots, big old shoots, and what we're doing is we're taking those back to about 5 leaves. So you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, give that a little cut, and that's it. One of the reasons that I do this is to clear around the windows and make sure that actually the plant doesn't grow up into the gutters. I'll save the structural pruning until the winter when I can clearly see the bare bones of the plant. And they'll also trim back the stems a bit harder to just 2 or 3 buds to encourage the plant to make lots of short flowering spurs. So really it's quite simple, but actually I've just got an awful lot of it. My 2 girls, Abby Jade and Amber Lily, are absolutely horse mad. But the upside to their costly obsession is a regular supply of fresh manure that I'm putting to really good use in the veg garden. Do you know, anybody that knows me knows that I do not like wasting anything, so to be able to reuse this manure is fantastic, and that's one of the reasons I've constructed these hotbeds. This is not a new idea. You know, the Victorians were doing it. Even the Romans understood the value of that stuff. So I've used railway sleepers, which is ultimately is pressure-treated timber. Set the first one up nice and level on a solid base. And what I've done is actually each corner I've overlapped, and that just gives it some strength. All I've got to do now to finish this off is make some cold frame tops. Simple timber frame, nice glass on top, and the bed will be finished. I'm filling the hotbeds to 2/3 deep with a mix of fresh manure and straw. The manure will break down and generate heat and create a warm environment that I can use at the beginning and back end of the year to grow salad crops. But it'll also be great for growing heat-loving plants like melons during the summer. After about 4 months, that heat will start to disappear and you'll actually have to clear the whole thing out and start again. But what you will have is this wonderful manure that can go straight onto the garden. So actually, in reality, do you know what? It's win-win.
These climbing beans are called Blauhilde. And they're a really good colour and delicious. They may look like dried up old husks, but inside are perfectly good dried beans. Now, you love a pea, don't you, Nige? But these are beans and they're dry and you won't like these. So these are haricot beans. So when you have your baked beans, that's what these are. And they're practically dry now, so I can just dry them for a few days, put them on a sieve of some kind, anything where the air can get through, and then put them in a jar with a screw top, and these will store all winter. I'll pull up the bean sticks and then take the beans off later because I want this piece of ground to grow some elephant garlic. Now the whole thing can come out like that, and I can strip it later on. Pop this over here. Garlic likes good drainage. It actually does very well in rich soil, as long as it doesn't get too waterlogged. However you grow it, garlic usually ends up looking like garlic. But that isn't true of all vegetables, particularly not root ones. And a couple of weeks ago, I asked you to send me any pictures of misshapen or even rude vegetables that you had grown in your garden. Well, we got some very rude ones indeed. And some which were just odd, but most were just very funny. Well, it takes all sorts, and I hope you enjoyed that as much as we did. Now, elephant garlic, as the name suggests, is much bigger than normal garlic. That is a single clove. So you can imagine there'll be 4 or 5 cloves in each bulb, and they really are substantial. Now that means two things. One, that one clove goes a long way. But even though they're bigger, they are actually milder than most garlic. Very, very good for you too. They seem to be fairly resistant to the diseases that a lot of alliums can get. I'm talking about rust, white rot, and white rot is a problem in this garden, and I'm hoping that we won't have it in these borders here. That is a ball put there by a dog and not a garlic. No point in looking at me like that. Go on, good boy. That, however, is an elephant garlic that hasn't formed cloves. And the reason for that, and it's quite common in garlic of all kinds, is because it didn't have enough cold weather in winter. And that's why you plant garlic now. And I like to have it done by the end of October. Like all garlic, you need to bury it. The pointy end wants to be at least an inch, and maybe more, below the surface. And as for spacing, a good 9 inches or a foot apart. All I have to do is cover these over, label them, and leave them. Keep them weeded, but leave them and they'll be ready to harvest round about the end of next June. The important thing is give them a winter to get cold, and that will vernalize them, and then you'll get those nice separate cloves. Well, here at Longmeadow, I'm lucky. I've got the garden, and beyond the garden are green fields, but not everybody has that outlook. And as part of the RHS Greening Grey Britain campaign, Flo Headlam has been transforming grey gardens with a touch of colour. This week takes her to the West Midlands.
This week, I'm amongst the rooftops in the city of Birmingham. Our cities are expanding, populations are growing, and in this new crowded world, I'm wondering, will there be spaces for gardens? Well, Birmingham City Library has come up with an eye-catching solution. Its magnificent roof terraces are essentially a series of gardens in the sky. Taking inspiration from the library garden, I caught up with busy junior doctor Christian Labib to see if I could help him transform his stark, exposed, south-facing roof terrace. You've got this great space up here, this roof terrace, you know, looking out over all of this. Do you get much chance to come up here?
I try my best to come up here as much as possible, but as you can see, it's a little bit dull, a little bit derelict. It needs a bit of a spruce up, I think.
Yeah, we could do with some more greenery up here, I think. Yeah. Leave it with me. It's a really big space, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to focus on one corner. So I've got 4 planters I'm going to put in here, in this corner, and they're really easy to make up, and I'm going to show you how to do it. I've chosen flat-pack wooden containers because they're lightweight, they're easy to transport, especially if you have to bring them up to a roof terrace, and you can put them together quite easily. This is phase 1. I've put the ends together. Now I'm going to put the long side on. I'm sweating. It's almost done. I just need to put the feet on now. Whew. Job done. I've planted up a couple of them already, but I'll just show you what I'm going to do with this one. I've lined it with some geotextile material. The liner is permeable, so it will help keep the compost in place, but also reduce the amount of rot on the wood. Now I'm just going to fill it with compost. It's multi-purpose, it's moisture retentive. I'm also adding gravel, because that's going to help with my Mediterranean plants and with my alpine plants that like stony, free-draining soil. And then I'm going to top up, actually, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to just get my hands in and just turn it over and mix it in. I know Christian's a really busy guy, so I've chosen plants that are going to be tough and that will survive, you know, with very little watering. So they're quite drought tolerant. I've got some lovely thyme, which will be great for his kitchen garden. Beautiful smell. I've got some sage, nice purple sage. Might just try that next to that one there. One of my favourites, Verbena bonariensis, great for attracting wildlife. And some great height as well. Got some grasses. Again, you know, they love that dry, hot situation. Gorgeous. And I'm putting in some oregano because it's always good as part of your kitchen garden. Christian can just come up and grab a handful and go to the kitchen. And a beautiful hebe, which is evergreen from New Zealand, loves this kind of climate. I'm packing them quite tight, but, you know, it makes a great impact as well. Yeah, I think that could work. I think I'll plant it up now. These young plants are all going to need to be watered every 2 or 3 days until they establish. But once they mature, this particular mixture of herbs, alpines, grasses and exotics should all cope naturally with both drought and hot sun. They're all great plants for busy professionals. City centres are often warmer and milder than the countryside, so I'm chancing my arm with exotics. A Mediterranean olive tree, Mexican echeverias, and a beautiful silverleaf Dastelia from New Zealand. They have the bonus of being evergreen too, so they'll give year-round interest, perfect for balconies, terraces and window boxes. The ideal choice for greening grey inner city Britain. Christian, if you pardon the pun, I think it's just what the doctor ordered.
No, I completely agree with you. It's really, really great. It's lovely.
You said you wanted something for the kitchen,
Yeah,
so we've got some thyme, oregano, we've got some sage, purple sage, my favourite, Verbena bonariensis, and then a wallflower here. So that gorgeous colour, which really blends nicely with the thyme and with the herbs and with the grasses. Beautiful colours, and they will just bring some wildlife into your little corner here.
Lovely. I'm really excited to invite some friends over, enjoy the summer, enjoy the weather, and enjoy these lovely plants.
Cool. Enjoy.
Thank you.
In the first of a new 3-part series exploring the work of his fellow head gardeners, Alan Power has gone to meet James Cross at the Bishop's Palace in Wells. And his working day begins with a very unusual task.
The swans have been here since about 1870,
Yeah.
and it was one of the bishop's daughters in 1875 who taught them to ring a bell, which was placed just outside the gatehouse here.
So the swans ring the bell?
Yes, they do, yeah.
Do they?
The adults ring it. They teach the cygnets to ring it quite young, usually from about a month old.
It's such an amazing thing. We think we're training them, but actually they've trained us to feed them every day, just by ringing the bell. And to be honest, I'm a bit jealous. It's a great way to start the day. I wish I had this going on in my own garden. I might be training swans when I go back. One of the most scenic areas of the gardens is outside the moat. The Wells border runs alongside the reflection pool and is designed to incorporate the bishop's colours and complement the cathedral.
Hi, Bishop Peter.
Nice to see you.
This is Alan, who's come to see me today.
Hello, very nice to see you. What are you planning to do then today?
Well, we're going to deadhead these Astrantias, or Victorian pincushion plants,
Yes.
take out some of the dead heads and encourage some new growth.
Well, there's so many people coming through this year. I mean, the word's got out, these gardens are beautiful. So we need to get them looking at their best for a long time, and that's a tricky task.
It's like polishing a border. You can look back at the end of the day, and although it's a very subtle task, it makes a massive difference.
Not going to keep you any longer. Alan, lovely to see you.
Yeah, take care. Right,
let's get stuck
James. You know, when you have dead heads on perennial plants, some of it looks messy, but actually some of it can be beautifully architectural and can form really nice autumn colour. So it's important not to strip it out completely, isn't it?
That's it. You have to be careful at choosing what you are going to take back. Some of the grasses will look good. Some of the sanguisorbas will too, but it depends. I think this is one of my favourite roses, this Louis XIV, which is a particularly rich, deep, dark colour.
James takes me on a tour of the garden to get a sense of scale. What size is the whole place put together?
It's 14 acres altogether, so it's a big area to look after.
And intensively gardened, isn't it?
It is intensive, yeah, trying to keep it all neat and tidy and weed-free.
How many have you got on the team here?
Well, we're fortunate here. I've got 4 gardeners here. But then we've also got lots of excellent volunteers as well, which makes a really big difference as to what we can actually achieve each day. And if we're very lucky, they'll bring in some donuts for us as well.
Well, it's important because there's no better motivational thing for a gardener than cake or donuts.
That's it, at tea time.
And James, these hydrangeas, you know, they're quite young, aren't they? Is this a new planting scheme that you've put in over the past couple of years?
Yes, yeah, we put those in about 3 years ago.
Okay.
And they're gradually filling out. They're more natural, more relaxed out here in the outer gardens, yeah.
It feels really different in here, James, doesn't it? Different styles.
It's far more formal, more of an English garden style here in the inner gardens. This hot border really is just about having fun.
Yeah.
It's about having as long a season as possible, as much interest and as much colour.
So you're kind of using your own expertise, your own knowledge, just to extend that season.
That's it, yeah, just as I say, right through from May, right as far into the autumn as possible.
So James, how come these Rudbeckia?
Well, these will fill out quite nicely in the next couple of months.
Yeah.
And they'll take over from some of the other plants, such as the Achillea just here, which is just starting to go over. And the Eryngiums as well.
Yeah, now, as head gardeners, we're all thinking about the next season and sometimes 2 or 3 seasons ahead.
Yeah, you really want people to enjoy being able to see lots of things at as many times of the year as possible, really, and that's what we're doing, giving people more to enjoy as well.
I quite often say, you know, one of the best places to enjoy a herbaceous border is from right in the middle of it.
That's it, yeah.
You're in amongst the plants, you're in amongst the architecture of the plants, you can smell the scent, and actually being at a level with the plants gives you a really good sense of what it's all about. On our kind of last walk on the way out, I have to stop and admire the trees. You know, we've spent a lot of time looking down, looking at the soil, looking at the plants, looking at the colour. But actually, just looking around here, you know, my head is just being pulled up to the trees.
We're very fortunate here. This is a very different part of the garden. So we've got the ginkgo tree behind us, which was planted in 1830, the Victorian Indian bean tree, and lots of other ancient trees just on this south lawn here.
It's been lovely to spend the day with you and pick your brains and learn something from you as a fellow head gardener, but also learn a little bit more detail about your garden. It's been a really special day, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for your help. Appreciate it. Thank you.
We have swans here, and they swim down the river. And when it floods, which it does 3 or 4 times a year, they swim across the fields and come to the garden gate. But they don't ring the bell. Well, I can't offer you swans this weekend, but I can give you some jobs. And here they are.
Although red chilies look fabulous on the plant, it is important to pick them as soon as they're ripe. Not only will they taste better, but also the red fruits inhibit the green fruits from ripening. Remove them, you will get more ripe fruits, and indeed more flowers and more fruits forming well into autumn. The rainy season is approaching, and if you're leaving pots out over winter, it's the combination of cold and wet that does most damage. Jack up your pots so that they are raised above ground and will drain better. Sweet peas sown in October will make big, strong plants that will give you more flowers that will last for longer next summer. I like to use 3-inch pots, sowing 3 seeds per pot. Put them somewhere warm to germinate and keep them watered, and then when the seedlings have emerged, they can go to a frost-free place like a cold frame to be stored over winter.
I'm going to take a little bit of honey from my bees, leaving most of it for them, because if the weather is bad over winter, they will certainly need reserves. In fact, if it's good over winter, they'll need reserves too, because they'll be busy. Now, there's no way of knowing what the weather will be like for the months coming, but we do know what it's going to be like this weekend.
Good evening. There's been little significant rainfall for the gardens this week, and there's barely little to come into next. Now, through the weekend, there'll be a good deal of usable weather to get out there and tidy up the gardens. We'll be chasing cloud amounts around, but where the cloud breaks and we get some decent spells of sunshine in shelter away from that easterly breeze, it will feel quite pleasant. Always along those North Sea coasts, that easterly breeze driving in more cloud overnight, Saturday into Sunday, with a scattering of showers. But with clearer skies, we could see those temperatures further north and west dipping away. A touch of frost is not out of the question in sheltered glens of Scotland in particular, first thing on Sunday morning. So yes, a chilly start, but there will again be some decent sunny spells in the story for the weekend. A scattering of showers coming in off the North Sea coast, hopefully few and far between, but temperatures a little subdued for this time of year. Now, as we go into next week, no significant rainfall for the gardens, but where we get the clearer skies by day, it'll lead to cool nights.
I've left my bees alone all summer, and so they should have made a decent amount of honey. And if I take that off there, that's the spacer bar, and give a little puff of smoke in there, and take this out. Now, this is the bar that I took before, and you can see they've made a complete new comb of honey, and I can just tap the bees off. There you go, off you get. There you go. And now we can cut the honey off. Perfect. That can go back in. Another little puff. I'm going to take two because I've checked, there is masses of honey in there for them. So I'm very confident that whatever winter has to offer, they will have the resources to survive it. And I should stress that I don't do this alone. I have guidance, and I'm very much in the stages of learning. I'm a novice. And if you want to take up beekeeping, then the first thing to do is to join your local bee society and get help. Right, that can come off there. Oh, lovely. Absolutely fabulous. I'm going to put this back, leaving them relatively undisturbed and untraumatized. But just as an insurance, I've got a reservoir there, and this is a solution, a sugar solution, which they will only use if they need it to give them some reserves. Oh, it's dripping everywhere. How fabulous. And put the lid back on, and they can be left in peace. And I shan't look at them again or touch them until after the winter is gone. There you are. And here I am with my honey. There we are. Look at that. That's honey. Well, I should get about 5 jars from that of honey made from the flowers in the garden, and I've left plenty for the bees to enjoy over the winter too. But that's it for today, I'm afraid. But I'll be back here same time next week. So until then, bye-bye.